What up, YouTube? Webhead Mike here, and while I am not a fan of safety tools in your tabletop role-playing game, I am also a firm proponent of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If it's working well in your setting, in your system, in your table, by all means, Godspeed to you. I am simply opposed to it because I've seen it introduce more problems than it might solve. The first and foremost one is that while limitations can be a creative breeding ground, censorship and restrictions are the opposite. Now, we saw in the original trilogy of Star Wars, there were a lot of cool and creative ideas that came about because George Lucas had all these restrictive limitations to shooting, settings, environments, all conspiring to make him more creative with what he had. We also saw this again with Steven Spielberg in Jaws. Part of the reason why we didn't see the shark is because it kept breaking down. And we can see that in the documentary, The Shark is Still Working. Another occasion would be House of the Dragon versus Rings on Prime. Rings on Prime was a series that had so much money, it ended up doing less with more. Conversely, House of the Dragon was a series that did more with less. Rings of Prime almost had $1 billion to work with for its entire series. House of the Dragon had 100 million. Much more well spent, in my opinion. And in tabletop role-playing games, if someone's uncomfortable with something, they should make it be known to the director or DM or GM before things start going. And this is a sort of mixed bag when it comes to Session 02, because this is a great way to state preferences, home brews, and everything else going on. But it can also be a potential point where someone could pop in a poison pill, and that could really derail everything going forward. Another thing is, a lot of these problems, man, the universe just tends to unfold as it should. If someone really does have a problem with something, more often than not, they will either, one of a few things will happen. One, they leave. Two, one or both parties adapt something and then go forward. Or three, the cast members trust their director and keep on going. Now, in my Fallout game, this would have often come up because in that it's a bad world, like Mad Max bad, like potential barbarism bad. You had slavery, children being marketed, and a whole lot of other bad, neo-Nazis were also in it. Actual Nazis were in it. So there were a lot of things people could have taken offense to, but because the people I let at my table were very familiar with me, I knew what would bother them, and vice versa. And there was often also a lot of trust between us that, listen, I'm not going to introduce things to shock you or torment you. These are just things to challenge you and see if you can make the world a better place, or if you become worse for it. That's what it was all about. I wasn't trying to harm them. And that's another problem with the safety tools, is that you have to recognize nothing that happens at that table will actually hurt you. It's not you that it's happening to. It's an abstract. You don't have to worry about things happening there affecting you IRL. And if it does, well, then you should seek therapy or talk to someone, because that shouldn't be happening. You should be able to differentiate you from your player character. That's another thing that comes up with these. If you are not a licensed therapist or or someone who's good at hearing these problems, you have no point in using these safety tools, because that's actually what you're trying to do then. You're an amateur therapist. And worse yet, if you put up these things and there is a problem and someone does explode, then you open yourself to a potential litigious risk, because you did use these tools and you knew there was a problem and then you did nothing. Whereas if you just didn't use the tools, there is all this, there's far enough space to say, well, we didn't expect this to be a problem, so there was no point in addressing it, going into something. Another thing that solves this is, besides the session 0, and again, my session 0s aren't really a session 0, it's more like a session 0.75, because there's character generation if people haven't had the time to do anything previously, or they wanted to wait and see what everyone else was doing in person. No problem with that, especially if everything can be done well within an hour. Then there's also the opportunity for things to actually happen in the game. Now, anyone who joins afterwards, I'm going to have at least 2, maybe 1 player join after that first session. I'm going to have to try to meet with them outside of that session and introduce them to the setting, the characters, so that way they don't have to come in all flat-footed. And that's what a session 0 should be. Not an actual point where everyone's not actually playing, but this is a point when everyone gets accustomed to what's going to happen, themes, settings, preferences. Like, for instance, if it were to come to violence or anything, you could say, hey, can we keep it PG-13? And a lot of people are more often than not going to be quite okay with that. Maybe go into R with some language maybe, but I know I myself, I really don't have a high opinion of excessive swearing. I understand it can happen at times, but if you're saying blank, 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 you, or something to that effect, I think you're kind of lacking in vocabulary. But those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I know I'm not omniscient on this. I can get things wrong, but I would love to hear what you have to say. And if you watched this long, I thank you very much for your time. I hope you liked the video. And until next time, Webhead Mike, out.